Hello and welcome back to Unfazed Under Fire. I'm David Craigatz, the resilient leadership guy, your host and moderator for this show. This show aims to support executives in strengthening their impact and resilience in the face of today's increasingly uncertain, disruptive, and chaotic, crazy world we live in. Our stand on this show and in our consulting practice is that human beings have all the inner resourcefulness they need to deal with any measure of ambiguity, uncertainty, and chaos. And that comes from recognizing that leading and living is an inside-out journey, and that by following this inner path can be supported by knowing and applying certain simple, direct principles and practices that kind of allow you to be creative in how you lead and engage your power. To that point, we have a great show in store for you today. I have with me Eric Harkins, who I know will provide powerful insights into leading high-performing organizations and helping your organization become a magnet for the best talent it can find. Now, Eric is the founder and president of GKG Search and Outplacement, and GKG works with companies to help them get talent, keep talent, and grow talent. And before owning GKG, Eric held operations roles as a chief administrative officer at Vectra, and that company operates most of Verizon Wireless's retail stores. He was also VP of the Nerd Experience at The Nerdery. I love that, a premier digital product company. And prior to these roles, Eric cut his teeth in HR and rose to senior HR positions at Target, Best Buy, and United Health. So what drew me to have Eric on the podcast today is I had the great pleasure of hearing him speak about the principles from his book, Great Leaders Make Sure Monday Morning Doesn't Suck, which I love the title of. And it'll provide context for the conversation. And I can tell you, if you ever have a chance to hear Eric speak, go. And if you're looking for speakers, you can't go wrong with bringing them into your organization. Finally, Eric lives in Minnesota, has two children, a son that's 20 and a daughter 23. Did I get that right?
That's correct. Yep.
Oh, great. And I know you were very proud of him. So, Eric, I want to thank you for joining me on Unfazed Under Fire. Did I leave anything out about you that you'd like to mention?
No, I appreciate it. And thanks for the shout out. I'm glad you were able to hear me speak the other week. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to the conversation. So,
yeah, well, let's go.
All right.
I shared at the top of the show that we really believe that, people have this inner resourcefulness that most people are directed to through coaching and other means and life experiences eventually, and that there's this inside-out game that we're really in that sometimes we're not aware of. We think we're trying to figure out how to move the chairs around on that Titanic, and that doesn't really usually work too well, right?
Right.
But you've been very straight. You wrote this book in a very straightforward, direct, and also humorous way, which I love the style of the book, and it's also extremely well-paced, and it's in a way that it delivers. I'm just curious, before we go into it, what drew you to the particular content you wrote about, and what had you write in this particular style? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's a question I get a lot. Like, hey, how long did it take you to write the book, or what was the inspiration of the book? And it's a quick read. So one of the best compliments I ever got is somebody posted a picture of the book on LinkedIn and said it was a 2 glass of wine read, which I took as a compliment. Most people can get through it in about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. And, I joke with people. I said, it really wasn't that hard. It only took me 8.5 years. And there's a little bit of truth to that. So sort of it was not a bucket list item for me. For a lot of people, I'm going to write a book someday. I had never even given it any thought. And when I was the VP of HR at the Nerdery, and yes, my official title was VP of Nerd Experience, so that was a lot of fun. Yeah. I finished a meeting one day, and a guy who worked on my team came up to me, and I'll give a shout out to Brian Long. He's one of my favorite people in the world, and I've stayed connected with him this whole time. And he came up to me and he said, "Hey, Eric, have you ever thought about writing a book?" And I said, "No." "Why would you ask that?" And he said, "I just think it'd be a really good book. You have all these funny stories, but there's always a lesson to be learned. I don't know. I think it'd be funny, or I think it'd be good." And I said, "All right, great." And about a month later, he came by and he said, "How's the book coming?" I said, "Brian, there's no book." And he's like, "Bullshit. There's a book and you're going to write it." And he said, just write me a chapter. And that sort of was the start of it. And, as
Yeah.
far as the style, it's interesting, like probably because I'm not a writer. One of my favorite compliments that I've gotten is I've had people who, know me because we either work together or whatever. And they said, when I read your book, I felt like we were sitting at Caribou or Starbucks having a conversation. And I don't know if I like consciously wrote it in that style, but what's interesting is I'll tell you, I initially self-published the book and then was really humbled and proud that Forbes Books kind of republished
Yeah. That's
and
beautiful.
turned it into a really beautiful, physical product. And when the editors were talking to me, they were wanting to change a bunch of things. And had a few conversations where I said, listen, I understand why you want to change it. I know this sentence isn't written grammatically correct. Or, there were probably about a dozen places where I had to say, hey, I don't even know what this word is. It's not in my vocabulary. So, like, I would never use this word.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I
yeah, yeah,
think I
yeah. Good
did
for you.
want just something that people felt like, hey, I think we have short attention spans in today's world. I think they're getting shorter. And I will tell you that, probably the best compliment I get on the book is, thank you for writing a book that was easy to get through and one that I could finish. Because I do think people struggle with 300 or 400 page books in general, certainly business books. And so I guess I was trying to just, hey, this is all I have to say. It only took me, a little over 100 pages to put it out there, and so far it's been a really humbling experience. So
Yeah, well, that's it. Well, again, I think you're right. Leaders are so busy today. I think they're even post-COVID. I think they're busier. I don't know what's going on. I'm sure we
yeah,
could dissect that. We won't take the time to do that.
yeah,
But the truth of the matter is, is we talk about a lot about inner resourcefulness in our work through our consulting practice, and you're really learning to trust yourself, right?
yeah,
And I think that's if I think the last time I looked, there were over 15,000 books just on leadership on Amazon.
yeah,
And there's so many different ways of slicing and dicing a concept like leadership that has
yeah,
been probably overanalyzed, not enough, not expressed enough, and overanalyzed. Like,
sure,
and we have analysis paralysis on leadership in the world.
for sure,
But when you have a book like yours with a leader that's trying to make an impact,
yeah,
and, most people that are going to be drawn to this book are already people that are probably people centric, culture centric. They care about, they know the value of leadership, and they're
right,
looking for a way to kind of add some punch in their day, right? And add some
yeah,
energy into what they're doing and be inspired. And I think your book does that. And it really nails. And one of the things I love the story, which I like to start off with, is
yeah.
story about Cards Against Humanity. And I'm gonna let you tell the story because I think it really tells about the whole culture we're dealing with
Right.
in organizations around political. Just go ahead and tell the story about
Yeah.
that one because I
So
think it's a great one.
yeah, and it's a true story. And so I was the VP of Nerd Experience at the Nerdery, and really cool culture. People were wanting to come and see what it was all about, and a pretty senior level executive from a Fortune 500 company brought her team, and I was giving a tour, and we were walking through, and we happened to be in the HR department, and I could see her eyes kind of focus on somebody's desk, and they had Cards Against Humanity sitting there. And in the book I sort of do the back and forth of what the exchange looked like, and she basically said, you let people play Cards Against Humanity at work? And I said, well, only if they include me. And she's like, you're not serious, are you? And I said, well, yeah, we play it all the time. She's like, you sit down and play Cards Against Humanity with your team? I said, yeah. And she said, well, what if somebody gets offended? I said, well, then they probably shouldn't play. And she's like, well, people aren't upset that you're playing Cards Against Humanity. I said, upset? I said, they're upset because they're not laughing as hard as we are. I said, the only bad thing that happens is somebody's stomach usually hurts because we were laughing so hard. And I get it, right? I mean, yes, that game is not for everyone. But in the book, I talk about, if somebody is going to do something that takes advantage of an environment that allows you to play Cards Against Humanity,
Yeah,
sexually harasses somebody, makes an inappropriate comment or physical contact, whatever
yeah,
it might be,
yeah.
that is not because you were playing Cards Against Humanity. That's because that individual, and the word, my favorite word to use, and I'm sure we'll talk about it, that person is an asshole. And I like to use that
Right,
word
right,
very
right.
liberally. Um, and so I've always struggled with this sort of, well, I don't understand what the problem is. And we did. We had a couple of people on the team that wasn't their kind of game. They didn't like it. And, they
They didn't
understood
play.
why people did. But it's a
Yeah.
great story because it's still to this day, I have people that say, you didn't really do that, did you? And it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
talk to anyone at the nerdery, and it was a game that we played. And so, to me, it's sort of under that umbrella of we hire adults, we work with adults, let's treat them like adults. And you have to know your audience. I do
Of
swear a
course.
lot, but I did something for a local high school recently. I wasn't swearing when I was talking to the high school kids, although
Right.
they probably swear more than I do. But you got to know your audience a little bit. Um,
Yeah.
but for us it was just a fun game, and I'll tell you, that was 12 years ago, and I still every now and then I'll through LinkedIn or through text, we'll talk about the good old days of having a lot of fun at work at the nerdery. So
Yeah, well, I mean, and there's got to be a broader context around the culture you're creating other than, playing that game, right? So tell me a little bit about what you were building or behind the scenes, like
yeah,
outside of that game. What was how did you set the intentionality for that culture and the focus for that culture?
yeah, and I love what you talk about in terms of the sort of inside out journey, and I think one of the things you and I are really aligned on is, one of my favorite things to talk about, and if you've heard me speak or if you read the book, kind of the underlying message is, hey, let's not make this thing called leadership harder than it is, because it's really
Exactly.
not that hard.
No,
And
it
I
isn't.
was really,
I agree.
I was really lucky, and I didn't realize it at the time, but my very first job right out of college, I had done an internship with Target, and I was placed at T1, which is Roseville, Minnesota. So the very first Target store ever built. And this is 1995. And I had a department manager who had been there since grand opening day. And I think it was like 32 years at that point. And I remember it like it was yesterday. I walked up to her, introduced myself, and she said, "Oh, you're the new manager?" I said, "Yeah." She said, "You just graduated from college?" I said, "Yeah." And she said, "Well, let me explain to you how this is going to go." She said, "I don't work for you. You work for me." I said, "When I ask you for something, you're going to make it happen. And if you make my life easy, I'll make your life easy. If you don't make my life easy, this isn't going to work out very well for you at Target." And I remember in the moment, 22-year-old kid, wet behind the ears, walking away saying,
that
"Geez,
was
what's going on with this person?" And it was the best feedback I ever got early in my career, because I realized and it's sort of there's so many versions of it, leaders eat last,
yeah,
servant leadership.
right.
And for me, it's, I tell every new leader, especially in human resources, all you have to do is ask your partner, your business partner that you're supporting, three questions. What are your challenges with getting talent? What are your challenges with keeping talent? And what are your challenges with growing talent?
Growing
And that's
talent.
where GKG came from. GKG get
Yeah,
people.
exactly. I'm just
And
saying you
so
built a whole company out of
my
that.
sort of simple approach is, let's find out what's keeping the company from being great. And that's what we're going to focus on. So every role I've ever had, if you talk to people that worked with me at any of the companies I've been at, I've had the same playbook, and then I finally put it in a book. And it's been two things. And I truly believe that there's two things that are keeping companies from being great: letting underperformers show up and letting bad leaders lead people. And so I have
Yep.
a tool in the book, and I
Yeah.
started to implement it at the nerdery. I implemented it in bits and pieces everywhere I ever worked. And the tool is called Lead, and it's a leadership expectation tool. And we can talk about it if you'd like or not. But it's 8 questions to ask of the leaders in your company. And they're things like, do the leaders in your company create a culture high performers want to be a part of? Do they bring
Yes.
energy and enthusiasm to work every day? Do they build relationships at all levels of the organization? Or are they the kind of leader that walks by the receptionist every morning because he or she's not important enough to say hi to? Right. And
Exactly.
what
Exactly.
they're not, what my questions are not, are things like, did they cut costs? Did they manage their budget? Did they grow margins? Did they improve sales? And that's a real paradigm shift for a lot of people when I start my consulting engagement, because they constantly want to shift the focus to, well, let me talk about the results that this leader gets. And I always come back to, I don't care what the results are. Do people like working with and for them?
Yeah.
Because if they have a team of high performers, we're going to get all these results. But
Exactly.
we don't
It,
talk about how leaders show up. We don't measure how leaders show up, and we don't make that important. We hire leaders and tell them what their job is. Congrats, you're the new VP of Finance. Here's your office. See you
right.
Monday. But imagine sitting saying, hey, if you're going to join our company where we have this really precious culture, here's what's important to us. So that was a
Right.
long road to get to the question specifically about the nerdery, which was we do have something special here. And we can
Yeah,
mess this
exactly.
up by hiring the wrong leaders, or we can keep this going by making sure the leaders understand what's expected of them and how we're going to hold them accountable. And that, I think, is the magic. When a company starts to do that, they start to see the engagement levels increase.
Yeah, and let's face it, when you're hiring a CRO or a CFO or head of HR or a CEO, you're not hiring somebody that's, just got out of elementary school. They have the chops to do the
Right,
technical part of the job.
right.
And if that's all you're hiring for, you're
Yeah,
going down the wrong path, and you're basically closing your eyes and shooting without seeing the target,
I
right?
couldn't agree more.
You have to hire for leader. You have to obviously they got to pass muster on the technical ability. If they don't in their resume, then you're not going to look at their resume.
Right,
But then you should be filtering those people out
right.
based on their leadership skill. Now, something you also say that I want to speak to here
Yeah,
is you can't teach people to become leaders. I love that.
yeah,
So I love this one but I want you to point to it. So if you can't teach
yeah.
leadership, because we've been trying for years to drill it into everybody that comes in our organizations. I've been fortunate to be part of some large contracts and attempted to do it, right? So, but you really can't teach leadership. So tell me a little bit
Yeah.
about where that came from and how you came to that and what
Yeah,
that is all
and it's
about.
it's probably the biggest thing that people want to debate with me on, either
Yeah,
after
yeah, yeah.
they've read the book or after they hear me speak. Because I do have a fairly black and white approach to this that, one of my favorite sayings is a bad leader will never create a good culture, right?
Yeah,
Because they don't know what that looks like.
that's
And so
right.
I have people come up to me and they're like, you don't think people can change? You don't think people
Right.
can learn to develop skills? And my response to answer your question is always, it depends on what we're talking about, right? If you are
Right.
the type of person that walks by the receptionist every day for 5 years and never says hello, no, you can't teach them to be a better leader of people because they don't even have a thought in their head that this person is as valuable as my boss and that they are as important to what we're doing. In fact, in some ways, probably more important because they're the first face to any vendor coming in your building or any candidate coming in your building. And if all of a sudden they get feedback that you need to start being more approachable and you need to build relationships with people and you have to tell a leader that they need to do that. And all of a sudden the next day they walk up to the receptionist, good morning, Tom. How was your weekend? The receptionist is going to be like, the hell happened to this guy? Like, he hasn't said hi to me in years. And so it's not genuine and authentic. And I think my whole stance is that there is no secret class you can take to become a leader, right? It's not that hard of a job. It's
No, it's actually, I
really,
tell my clients all the time, it's easier than being a direct contributor.
for
I mean,
sure
you're
it is. And
you're
I
you're
tell,
facilitating creativity of others, and your job is to be in relationship with them and have them understand where things are going and all that. And then just you're checking in, and you're being paid to have conversations, basically.
I, I tell CEOs,
Yeah,
you're lucky because you have the easiest job in
his
the company.
job in the company.
They're
Yeah,
like, what? What do you mean? And I said, you only have one job. Your only job is to make sure you have the right direct reports.
that's
That's
great.
it. And
Right.
you should be spending your day walking around the office high fiving people. Because if you have to do something that you don't think you should have to do, you have the wrong direct reports.
You have the
That's
wrong
it.
reports.
And
That's
the
right.
reason leadership is hard is because you have so many poor performers that don't want to be there that you're not dealing with. Because I promise you, when you lead a team of high performers, being a people leader is the greatest job you can have. But the reason people say it's so hard is because half of your team, that might be a little dramatic, is not operating at the level that they should be or that they need to, or you suffer from the same thing most companies suffer from, a number of employees who quit. They just decide not to give you their notice. They show up every day, but they quit you a long time ago. And you
Yeah.
don't have the courage as a leader to make those moves and
Yeah.
change those people out. In that environment, yeah, being a leader is really hard. But I joke about it. Please don't send bad leaders to leadership workshops
Yeah.
because
Well, I tell you, yeah.
all you're
I
gonna have is
say,
a well-trained bad leader.
yeah, exactly. I tell people all the time, your best investment in coaching is with your best leaders because they eat it up.
Right.
When to me something wakes up in the human being that recognizes that creates some humility that I
Yeah.
don't know everything. In
Yeah.
fact, it's good for me to recognize I don't know everything. But as you say, if I hire the right people, they should know what I will fill in the gaps.
Right. And listen, nobody likes to have tough conversations, right?
No.
I talk about it in my keynote. In the roles I held, I had to fire a lot of people throughout my career. I never came home and high-fived my wife and kids. Ooh, I got to fire somebody else today. I
Yeah,
do joke
exactly.
about it in the book, and then I have a little side note. Well, except for a couple of times, because every now and then
Yeah.
there were
Felt
people who
good.
needed to
It
go
felt
away.
good.
But in general terms, it's not a fun part
Let's
of the
be
job.
honest.
Steve Jobs has a great quote. Hey, if you want to make everyone happy, don't become a leader. Sell ice
Yeah.
cream.
Yeah. Yeah.
But great leaders don't shy away from it. And I think the biggest misconception is that, you know, you can be an approachable, humble, genuine, authentic leader and still be tough on crime and fire a lot of people because the people that you're firing are the people that don't want to be there or are incapable of being there or are taking advantage of you or aren't responding to the feedback you're giving them to try to improve their performance. And I talk about it in the book. I hope, anyway, that if you asked people that worked for me throughout my career, hey, did you like working for Eric? If they were high performers, I think they would say, you know what? Yeah, I liked working for Eric. And if they were low performers, they'd probably say, I didn't really care for him that much. And I don't think that's arrogance. I think that's leadership, right? I cared a lot about the high performers who wanted to be there. And I think they knew that. And people that were sort of phoning it in, yeah, you know what? They didn't get to work there. So, anyway,
Yeah. 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 A
love
couple.
the conversation, but I don't think it's something. I mean, again, can you learn things if you're too wordy, if you ramble like I'm doing right now? You can get that coaching throughout your career, and hey, you need to be more concise. Yes, you can fix things like
Yeah.
that, but how you
Yeah.
treat people, no, you can't
You
really be
can't.
taught because if you're doing it because you're told you should or have to, then it's not genuine, and high performers can see through that pretty quickly.
Yeah, and I think sometimes organizations make it harder on leaders below, like the C-suite level, to
Yeah,
do the right hiring and to let go of people. Like
yeah,
we need to be more respectful or kind, or we have to make sure we're following this program, whatever. And at the end of the day, you're not serving your organization, you're not serving your shareholders, you're not serving those people, as you say, the high performers in your organization that are showing up every day with gumption and creativity and innovation to make things better.
right.
So the goal is to build like this, amazing opportunity, a magnet for the right people that are going to fit that situation. So I'm going to go to you, put your GKG hat on.
Yeah,
So how do you help clients? How do we help clients
yeah,
make sure they're hiring the right people? What are
yeah.
some of the things as far as making sure you are hiring people that match your culture? What do you tell your clients?
Yeah, it's one of my favorite conversations to have on sort of the front end of an engagement, especially when we're doing search work. And I'll talk about the consulting as well. But I tell people, listen, I am not going to ask any technical questions about their competency. To your earlier comments, if I'm interviewing somebody to be a VP of finance and they have 25 years of finance experience in the director and VP level, they can do the job, right? Unless they
Right.
lied on their resume. And if they did, then we'll figure that out pretty quickly. But assuming they didn't lie on their resume, you can do the job, right? You've been
Yeah.
an accountant for 20 years.
Right.
I want to know if you're going to be the type of leader, to your point, that's going to help us continue to build the culture we're trying to build. Now, the gap and the challenge is it is not an easy question for a lot of companies to answer. What is precious to you? What matters to you
Right.
with leaders? We
Right.
have values on the wall. We have a vision statement. We have a mission statement. Nobody really knows what it is anyway when you ask employees because it's just sort of words on the wall. And where it really came to life for me in my last experience in corporate America, I was the chief administrative officer for a wireless retailer, as you mentioned, that ran Verizon stores. Company was called Victra. We had 1,500 locations, 47 states. It was a big operation. And that was the first time in my career where we really completely embraced two tools that I'd been sort of sprinkling over a couple of decades. Lead, which again are those sort of 8 questions to ask, and then these 3 lessons that I learned along the way, and they become rules. And so I tell the story in the book, how much more important they were when they were rules. And lesson number 1, rule number 1, it's okay to have fun at work.
Yep.
Lesson number 2, poor performing employees don't quit voluntarily. And lesson number 3, assholes are assholes, they don't change. And I love to talk about that because all I did when we were hiring 175 new people to open this new operation for Verizon, because we consolidated 4 companies into one, was if they were a leader, I talked about lead. Hey, if you're going to work here, here's what's precious to us. Creating a culture high performers want to be a part of. Bringing energy and enthusiasm to work every day, building relations. And I would go through all 8. And as a team, here's what we're going to agree to do. We're going to have fun at work. We're not going to let underperformers show up, and we're not going to let bad leaders lead people. Let's see what that looks like. And having that kind of foundation on the front end. So what I do with clients is we have that conversation. What are the expectations for your leaders? And almost no companies have that.
It's
The
right.
individual,
You're absolutely right.
the CEO might have things he or she looks for. The CFO might have things he or she looks for. But as far as a leadership team saying, here's the 4, 5, 8 things that are non-negotiable if you're a leader here. And so that's what I try to do is help them establish that. Now, some of the clients I've worked with take it right out of the book. Hey, we like these 8. We're just going to implement.
Yeah.
Great. Some of the companies say we like the concept of having expectations, but we're going to come up with our own. Great. Doesn't matter what they are. It matters if you have them. And once you have them, everything else becomes so much easier. Because when you sit down with that leader and say, hey, David, as you know, building relationships at all levels of the organization is critical to us. Mary's been trying to meet with you for 3 months and you've canceled on her 6 times. Tell me how you feel that's building relationships at all levels of the organization. And then it's not personal. It's not that I don't like you. It's this is what we told you we were going to ask you to do. And, energy and enthusiasm is one of my favorite ones. I do not understand senior leaders who walk around every day like their dog died. I just don't get it. If you don't like being there, then leave. Exactly. But you think your team's going to be excited about being there when you're always acting stressed, you're always too busy, you never have time for who wants to work in that environment, right?
Yeah. Well, again, again, you're talking about important reflection for organizations. What gets in their way of doing that is they're so, and this is going to sound counterintuitive, right? They're so focused on outcomes, financial measures. All that's important for like knowing where we're at and are we moving in the right direction and are we reaching goals that we set. All that's important. But when that becomes the fixation and you're not reflecting on this quality of leadership and culture that you're creating, I think the people are doing a better job of talking the talk, not necessarily walking the walk in that. Yeah. When you don't have that in place, you don't really have any guardrails for how we get those results.
Right.
And results done in a dehumanizing way eventually hurt results.
Right.
You might get the results. You might get over the finish line.
Sure.
But when people get over the finish line and they're completely exhausted, and then you're saying, okay, next initiative. Right. But there isn't any of that energy and vibration, upliftment and empowerment. Then you're going to also lose good people.
Yeah. And I, you heard the keynote. And so I talk about, that your high performers are every day waiting for you as their leader to deal with the people who aren't pulling their weight. Right. And in every day that goes by that, this underperformer gets to show up and be late for a meeting and not be prepared and, whatever it might be. is a day closer to when that high performer says, I'm going to go somewhere where I have a shot at being valued, right?
Right,
And
right.
it sounds oversimplified, but it really is true. If you focus on two things, dealing with your underperformers and really being very, very hard on what your expectations are for leadership, if you just do those two things, and I tell a couple of stories in my keynote that people always, love to talk about, just things I saw leaders do that you just say, God, did they really just say that to that person? Did they really just do that? And it's like these leaders are out there every day.
Yeah.
They're doing things that people say, wow, what a bad leader, right? What a
Right.
bad person. I hope I never have to talk to that person again. And these people stay at their companies for 10, 20, 30 years treating people poorly, and that's sort of the never-ending quest is, I like to say, I'm trying to change company culture one Monday morning at a time.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
it's
That's
going to be a
beautiful.
lifelong challenge, and I love it. But we can do better than we're doing in a lot of companies. So
Yeah, and a lot of anybody, anybody that's a human being can be triggered, react, and say
sure.
something they regret. And I say always two things leaders have to learn how to say is, I was wrong, I apologize.
Yeah.
In certain situations, that could be a very powerful move
Yeah.
for people saying, I don't know.
Yeah.
But we can find out. So, the more they can integrate those into their, not like all the time, but as a strategy, but as a recognition that there's a human experience that happened over there, and
Right.
while my intention was not to harm or hurt that person, I could
Right.
clearly see I went too far.
Yeah.
And again, it's showing up as a full human being with people, real, authentic as yourself. And one of the things you also point to in your book about, leaders are many times polarizing personalities. They're not like in a mold, right? So
Right.
tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that. They're not in your words.
Yeah, and I think in the book it's sort of focused on support roles, right? Whether that's an HR role or whatever. That really good leaders are yeah, they're oftentimes polarizing personalities because the people who are really liking what they hear or liking what they see are usually the high performers saying, hey, this person knows what they're doing. I like their style. The person who doesn't typically like that is the underperformer because they're being held accountable.
Right,
Ooh, they have
exactly.
to do
I
things
don't like that polarizing
it's like,
personality.
wait, my last four bosses haven't actually made me come to work on time.
Yeah,
What's this person think they're doing? And so that's
yeah,
sort of where the polarizing comes in, and then that kind of bleeds to the conversation around, subject matter experts do not necessarily make great leaders, and it's such a common mistake that we
yeah.
make. It's typical in like a manufacturing environment. Your best employee on the line gets promoted to line leader, and all of a sudden all the performance and production is down because A, they didn't want to be a leader, and B, they don't know how to be a leader, and now you just lost your best line person, and it's this kind of perfect storm. And I joke about it in the book, but it's true that, listen, I was lucky in my career to be the head of HR at three different companies, and I don't know that much about human resources. And anyone who's worked for me would say he's not kidding about that. He doesn't know that much about it. And I loved hiring people and having people on my team that knew everything about human resources, right? And I think another kind of unintentional mistake that we make is, you know, think about the leaders. If you're listening to this, think about the leadership, your C-suite, senior vice president, whoever it is, your senior leadership team, and are they subject matter experts? And if they are,
Right.
that doesn't mean they're a bad leader, but
No.
subject matter experts typically do what subject matter experts do. They're the smartest person in the room. They make all of the decisions. And your high performers are sitting there saying, well, what do you need me for? Right? If you're just going to make all the decisions, I can go execute anywhere. I want to be a contributor, right? And so it's
Right.
part of that, and back to the polarizing. I mean, back to and one of the things you and I connected so well on is just this sort of genuine and authentic. Be your whole self.
So,
One of
so
my sayings is just be who you are, right?
exactly.
And if more leaders said, I don't know how to do this, can you help
Yeah.
me, to their team? Boy, that would look so much different. But we have this ingrained thing that, now that I'm a leader, I have to have all the answers. It's like, no, you don't.
Yeah, it is interesting how people get put in that position and all of a sudden they're looking around what it is it's they're hitting a floor on their self-confidence. They got to regain it. But I love when a leader that is in finance gets moved over to marketing
Oh,
or when they because you can be a coach and a leader anywhere and you
yeah,
don't have to deeply know. You should learn over time some of the technical competence in that area,
yeah,
but if you have good people in those
yeah,
positions that know what they're doing,
yeah.
they just need to be supported, provided with empowerment and development opportunities, and to find out what floats their boat so you can support them and
Right.
steam it along right in their career.
We could spend an hour talking about this because I couldn't agree more. And, I do talk about it in the book that I didn't realize it at the time, probably with where I was in my career and my age. But when I was at Target and kind of growing up in HR, the CEO at the time was Bob Ulrich. And I was a huge fan, as most people were who worked there. And one of the things he started doing is exactly what you're talking about, right? The head of stores would become the head of HR. The head of HR would become the head of asset protection. Asset protection would go run supply chain. And an outsider looking in, it was sort of like, well, what's going on? And I couldn't agree more that if you are a great leader, you should be able to run any function. And people, even finance, I'd even argue even finance. Now, maybe that one where there's some really specific, regulatory things that you have to be able to do. But then I'd come back and argue then your number two person in finance should be able to do all of that. Right.
Yeah,
And if
right.
it really truly is about that, and I love the idea of, mixing and matching and moving your leaders around dependent on their great leaders, right?
Yes.
And I always struggle a little with, the difference between HR and the operations person and the salesperson. Like, no, it's the same job, right? Everyone's job is the same. Do we have the right people? Are we getting, keeping, and growing? And where we have underperformers, they need to be addressed. And so I think the greatest move that Target made was they'd take HR people and put them in stores and take stores people and put them in HR because it was the same job.
Yeah.
It was, do we have the right people in, are all of my store managers the right people? Are all my district managers the right people? And then at the HR level, you're just doing that globally versus for your district or your region or your territory. But it's the same work. It's making
Yeah.
sure that we're creating a culture that high performers want to be a part of and making sure that Monday morning doesn't suck, right?
Yeah. Well, and also I think great leaders, if you really hire for that, they have an instinct for the right people.
Yeah.
I worked with one client that started. When I worked with her, she was in a finance role, then got a CFO position.
Yeah.
Now she's a president of the company that hired her as CFO, right?
Yeah.
And there was a growth curve because she wasn't as tuned to the commercial side of the business as much.
Sure.
But she is like a people and culture
Yeah.
evangelist
Yeah.
and walks her talk.
Yeah.
And she can go to a networking event and she will zero in on somebody and then she says, I want you to come over and have coffee with me in my office. And very soon they're giving them an offer sheet because she just knows she can see talent and
Yeah.
feel talent and
Right.
trust her instincts. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of times, yes, you want to have these frameworks, but a lot of times leaders just have instincts on the right. This is
Yeah.
the right person to bring in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think a big part of it, and it depends on your company, right? But a big part of the leadership kind of journey is being visible and being present, right? And
Yes,
I had a lot of my
absolutely.
career in retail, and we always had different types of retail leaders in the field, right? We'd have district managers who, and one of my favorite things to do when I would visit stores with a district manager, typically a district manager is going to have 8 to 10 locations, maybe 12. And if they had to type the address of the location that we were going to visit into their phone, it was an immediate acknowledgement for me that they're not in stores enough. Like,
Yeah.
you have 8 locations and you don't know how to get there without a map. Like, you should know every back road to every location.
Yeah,
And it
exactly.
was just like this instant understanding that, wow. And you could feel it when you'd go into the stores, the connection they did or didn't have to their team. versus some of the best district managers who knew the, names of the grandchildren of the cashier
Cheer,
because
right,
they were there every day, every week, every month, and they just
right,
got to
right.
know the team. And so that's a big part of some of the work we do is, how visible are your leaders? If you have any kind of a field function, you can't
Yes,
be the head of
you can't.
stores and not visit stores. You
Yeah.
can't be the head of, clinics and not go out and visit clinics or whatever your environment is.
Or you
And
can't be a
so,
sales leader and not go to
and
watch your salespeople in front of a customer. I mean,
right,
how can you manage them, right?
because the
Yeah, it's
days of managing from a spreadsheet are gone, right?
yeah,
And one of my favorite things to talk to companies about is, let's make no mistake, the game has changed, right? You are no longer interviewing candidates. Candidates are interviewing you because I
right.
have 15 opportunities that I could go, especially if you have an hourly population. They drive to work, they have 12 billboards, all probably paying the same that you're paying them, for a position like that. So what's making your environment special enough that I want to keep coming here when I could go across the street and literally maybe make $1 more an hour, right? And whatever
Absolutely.
it might be. So
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Uh, you you also speak in the book about a leader as steward, which I think is probably the highest form of leadership. Is I would say that I'm assuming this, and it's related to the lead, kind of a being a servant leader, right?
yeah,
Being a
yeah,
steward. Talk a
yeah.
little bit more about what you think about what that's
Yeah.
about for you. What
Yeah, I
steward
kind
is,
of
the
joke in the
steward.
book and I say, I don't really even know what the definition of stewardship is, but it's something like leaving it better than you found it.
Yes.
And for me, it's always been about, hey, do the leaders in our organization really feel that way, that my role is to make things better? And certainly in the last 3 or 4 years, a lot of my conversation has been prefaced with, yes, there are going to be things that disrupt our business that we have no control over. Global logistics issues, global pandemics, but great leaders understand, even with all that adversity, what can I do to make things a little bit better? And sometimes it's, what does the team need? My favorite thing to do was to go into a store and just ask the question, what's
What
the
do you
worst
need?
part about working here?
Yeah.
And it takes a while for people to actually realize you
You
want the
share.
answer, right?
Yeah. You're not just
Like, and
asking.
because
Yeah.
oh, you're the executive from corporate, and no, it's great working here. I'm like, no, there's days where you want to quit. What's happening in those days that make you want to quit? And usually what they're talking about is stuff that's fixable, right?
Yeah.
And so stewardship to me is just saying, hey, kind of back to, her name was B. That's all I can
Right.
remember. It's a
Right.
long time ago, that department manager who put me in my place on day one at Target, she was right. My role is not to tell her how to do her job that she's been doing for 32 years. It's, hey, what's frustrating? Well, I've been asking corporate for these sign holders for 3 months and nobody's gotten me sign holders. Like, it's not like huge things. I want you to, double my salary and whatever. It's usually something that's so simple. It's like, well, I don't
Right.
understand. Why hasn't anyone done that before? Well, because no one's ever asked. So
Yeah.
that's part of sort of being genuine, authentic. But, what can I do to make it just a little bit better? And, simple things like, the letter in our sign out front has been burned out for 6 months. Like,
Yeah.
it could just be things that are physical environment things. It could be, there's a bunch of trash in the parking lot and I'm going to go and either, get somebody to do it or I'm going to do it myself even better. But, it's things like that. And again, that goes back to it's not huge things that cost millions of dollars. It's
No.
kind of simple things that people just want the platform to say, here's what would really make my job a lot easier. Right. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so for me, stewardship is just, what if every leader in your company showed up every day with a goal to make things a little bit better? Yeah,
Yeah.
that could be sales, that could be profitability, that could be margins, but it could
Yeah.
just be environment, culture,
I
laughter.
love I love that because I think sometimes CEOs want to ignite empowerment and leadership in the organization at their own detriment, and they don't realize they're doing it.
Yeah.
We need innovation around here. I want every department to innovate. Go off and innovate, right? And they create these, or they don't define it. They provide. They think they're igniting, and they are igniting a spark in people. What the problem is, it creates a forest fire
Right.
of busyness
Right.
that may or may not add up to what that CEO wanted them to do. Whereas you say it's so true, and I tell my clients all the time around personal habits.
Yeah.
Don't try to change 5 habits at once.
Right.
Change one and incrementally get better at it every day. And before you know it, within a month or two,
Yeah.
that's no longer an issue for you. And it really is true. Small incremental changes over a long period of time are much more powerful most times. I'm not saying all the time. There's never every time. Than trying to make these big, massive changes all at once.
Yeah. Well, and I have a chapter in the book, if it's broke, fix it. And the whole concept is, find out what needs to be fixed or addressed, and then do it. Or if you can't, explain why. That's all people need is closure.
Yeah, the context.
And we've been asking for this new monitor for 3 months, and I don't know, I've submitted 14 tickets to IT and nobody's gotten back to me. Well, first of all, we all learn, let's fact check that. Hey, show me the tickets that you've submitted.
Yeah, exactly.
And they can give you the 14 tickets and you can go back to corporate and say, hey, why is this happening? Like, where's the breakdown? And if it's that they don't get a new monitor till next week or next month, or it's in the budget for next year, why can't we just tell them that? But no answer then just creates that finger pointing. And, any company that has a corporate office and a field organization struggles with corporate doesn't understand our job and we don't understand their job. And it's just a lot of useless finger pointing. But, that's where I came up with sort of this every guest, every time, every store, every time concept in my last role, where I started to lay this goal out for, again, we had 1,500 locations, 6,000 employees. And I said, what if every time a guest came into our store, they had a great experience? What would that look like? Exactly. And then back at corporate, it was, what if every time a store called us with something that they needed to help give better customer service, we actually got it for them? What would that look like? And I'm not naive. Do I think 6,000, part-time hourly employees were giving amazing customer service every day?
Right.
No.
Right.
But when you set the expectation, kind of like leave, when you have something to go back to, it's at least in their mind, every guest, every time, every store, every time. So, part of it is, and that goes back to, do you have expectations that are pretty clear and easy, right?
Yeah.
Not values, because that's not what we're talking about here, but expectations that you're actually going to hold people accountable to.
Well, that you're committed to. You have commitments around them, and they're explicit. They're explicit and they're committed to. Yeah.
Right.
I want to kind of go to another subject, because I ask this of all my guests that come on that do the kind of work you do or are leaders in organizations. A few things have changed around here over the last 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to get into politics here. That's not what I'm trying to do. However, there is a lot of distractions in the world today that can pull us into, quite frankly, fear, right?
Yeah.
I feel like one thing that organizations do when they're creating the kind of workplaces you're talking about, and I agree and align around that they should create, is they're creating an oasis for people to go to every day and feel meaning in their life.
Yeah.
And that's very, very important to have that place, especially now where you can contribute and feel that you're doing good work.
Yeah.
But also I feel like organizations need to be attentive to what their employees are dealing with when they leave the office and go back out into the world. I'm just curious what you think about that, what your thoughts are, what's really changed in the workplace that we have to attend to most right now in the world that we're in.
Such a powerful question. And, for anyone that was, dealing with the whole, are we going to return to work? What does that look like? Hybrid situation. It was the biggest no-win conversation in corporate America, because what you care about and what I care about aren't the same thing. And now you multiply that by 100 or 1,000 or 10,000 employees. And so I try really hard to keep things as simple as possible, right? So I'm going to probably answer your question in a couple of ways. And one of
Sure.
the things I talk about in the book is that I really, and in my keynote, I really believe people want three things when they go to work. And I don't care if you're my daughter who's 23, kind of starting her career, or you're 63 and you're almost, retiring. You want a cool place with cool projects and cool people. And you actually defined one of them in your comment. A cool place means, hey, there's something about the brand or the product or the building or the company that makes me want to work there. Right. I mean, when Best Buy opened their corporate headquarters and there was a bank and a cool cafeteria and a daycare and dry cleaning, and I was like, wow, who doesn't want to work there? Like, this is a cool
Yeah,
place,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Cool projects is what you were talking about. I'm rewarded or I feel recognized for my work. I feel like I'm contributing. And it's an environment that I could see myself in for a while. And then cool people is the commitment from the company that we're not going to let bad leaders lead people, right? So if you kind of start with a what are we doing to create that? That's part of the oasis, right? A safe place where I can kind of be my authentic self. But I
Right.
think a big part of it also is a great leader gets to know their team at an individual level, but even more importantly, lets their team get to know them at an individual level.
Yes,
And you
exactly.
have to understand what each person is motivated by. This employee wants every chance they can get to be put in front of the CEO. This
Yeah.
person would be mortified if you asked them to go present to the CEO.
Right.
Both are okay, but so often we're creating anxiety for our employees because we're simply just asking them to do things that they don't even have to do. We think they want to, but we haven't even
Yeah.
asked. I
Yeah.
just assumed you'd want to go present to the board. Oh my God, no. Like I'd be
Yeah,
mortified
exactly.
to present to the board. But Billy over here is like, oh my God, I'd loved it, but nobody's asked me. Like, what do they want, right? But there's
Exactly.
also this kind of, I can't tell you how many times I've been having a conversation with a leader and they've been talking about an issue or a challenge with an employee. And my comment is usually, have you asked them why? Or have you asked them about it?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
usually the answer is, well, no, I didn't. I mean, do you think I should? And it's like, well,
Yeah.
it's not much of a conversation.
Omniscience wasn't in the job description. You don't
Yeah.
have to be
Like
omniscient.
one of the
You
things
can ask.
one of the things I don't understand is in the
Yeah.
new world we live in, which is more virtual, which is more remote, which is more hybrid, and Zoom's revenue is up significantly for a reason, is people who don't turn their camera on. I don't get that, right? I get it if you're stepping away to run to the restroom or you're stepping away, it's a 2 hour call and you get going. I get that. But to me, that employee who sits on a call with their leader and peers with their camera
Exactly.
off, to me, honestly, is that employee saying, I just don't want to be here, right?
Exactly.
Because
Yeah.
3 years ago, we didn't get to turn our cameras off,
Right. We
right?
had to be in the room. We had to be in the conference
And
room. Regardless whether we
and,
like to or
and
not.
unfortunately, the people that were in a different country or state were at a disadvantage
Yeah.
because,
Yes. Yes.
and I agree with all that, but it's like, so I'll often say to a leader, well, have you asked them why they don't turn their camera on? And if the answer is something like, I just, I don't want to be seen, or well, but we want you to have your
You
camera,
see.
right? I'm not going to give you this mandate or give the mandate. I want you to have your camera on. Because to me, it's like, wouldn't you want to? Like, you know, years ago, Gallup came up with their Q12, right? What are the 12 questions that are going to tell you how your company's running? And one of them is, do you have a best friend at work, right? Let's be honest, a big part of why we look forward to going to work or not is our boss and the people we work with.
Yeah.
And if we at least even sort of like our boss, but we like the people we work with, wouldn't you want to have your camera on? Wouldn't you want to interact? Hey, Mary, how
Exactly.
was your weekend? Oh, I wish we were in the office today. So to me, it's just having the conversation, right? Like,
Yes.
hey, you know, how can I help you? Right now, I had a very interesting conversation just last week with an HR leader who I'm sort of a resource for and work for the company. And her situation was that this employee came up to her and completely unrelated to work having an issue with another employee outside of work, not during work hours, and wanted the company to deal with it. And it's like, well, there's a line. Like, what you do in your personal life isn't really any of our business.
Right.
But yes, we're going to create a safe place for you when you're here. And how can I help? And be empathetic and be a resource, but also understand that, we're here to create an environment that you want to be a part of. And it's usually not that hard. I mean, I saw you kind of shake your head when I said, have you asked them? Like, it's almost that simple. Like, hey, I'm curious why you don't, whatever. Or you look a little down today. Is it something you want to talk about? Because I do think there's an element of, great leaders care just as much about their team when they're not at work as when they are.
Right.
And let's face it, the world we live in, you're never really not available anymore. Right? I mean, we're a text away, we're a phone call away, we're a Zoom call away. And so you are kind of always on. So why not create that sort of supportive environment, both inside of the walls of your office and outside? So.
Yeah, and again, that's all about context, about why we want the cameras on, right? It's all about being overt about that we're trying to be seen. We want to be connected together. We can't be in the office, so at least we want cameras on. Well, I really appreciate. We could go on and on and on and on for hours, and it's like and we will over time. Yeah, and we'll have to have you back on, but. Is there any final words you would like to say? Anything like you would feel complete about anything you wanted to share today? And I will make sure that there's links to connect with you below the podcast in the various areas. But is there anything else you want to say as we complete today?
Yeah, I love the conversation, and for the listeners, we had met for coffee and we could have stayed all day, and I love having this conversation. Certainly appreciate sharing my contact information. People can find me on LinkedIn. My website's pretty easy to remember. It's just my name, ericharkins.com. And I really genuinely enjoy having these conversations. If I can be a resource, if I can help, if I would leave the listeners with anything, it's, today, after you've listened to this, if you're a senior leader, if you're a CEO, really, truly ask yourself this question. Do I think I have the right leaders? And are we letting underperformers show up? And as simple as it sounds, those two things will dramatically change the environment. And, this goal of making sure Monday morning doesn't suck, which is sort of my elevator pitch.
I love it.
It's a fun conversation to have because it's so real, right?
Yeah, it is.
And it's so avoidable. The employees who have that pit in their stomach on Sunday night, you can fix that. But you have to be willing to have some honest, hard conversations at times, which is where it breaks down. So, listen, I appreciate very much being able to join your podcast, and love the work you're doing. And we need more people like you that are pushing this sort of agenda of, hey, let's get people excited about going to work again.
Yes, absolutely.
Life is short, right?
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate the richness of this conversation again, Eric. Thank you for being on the show. And for everybody else, I want to thank you for joining. I hope you enjoyed the show. I know you must have enjoyed this show because it was a great show. Thank you again for joining Unfazed Under Fire. I wish you have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon on our next episode of Unfazed Under Fire. David Craigot signing out. Have a great day. Bye-bye.